All right, today we're talking with Navy veteran Brett Crozier, author of Surf When You Can, and former commanding officer of the aircraft carrier Theodore Roosevelt. Brett, you've had a interesting career in the Navy, a long, successful career in the Navy, and looking forward to hearing all that, and also about your new book coming out. So, first, take us back and tell us about what you did in the Navy.
Sure. I had a phenomenal career, Joe, in the Navy. 30 years, flew helicopters initially after graduating from the Naval Academy, switched over to fighters, flew F-18s for another 20 years to the end of my career. I had command of a squadron and then switched over to the nuclear power pipeline. So that sent me to nuke school. I was the XO in the Ronald Reagan, had command of the Blue Ridge, and then ultimately command of the Theodore Roosevelt. And then even after I left the Roosevelt, I served 2 more years here in San Diego, Naval Air Forces, kind of running readiness budgets and still flying. I got to keep flying Super Hornets to that point up until the
Mhm.
month I retired. So it was a phenomenal 30 years. We're a Navy family, and that my oldest son is a veteran doing IT stuff now. My middle son is an ensign in the Navy, and my youngest son is probably not going to go Navy because he figures his brothers have already given enough, and we'll see where he ends up. But we live now here in San Diego, and now I work at Veterans Village of San Diego, which is a large nonprofit focused on veteran issues here in Southern California.
Oh, that's awesome. I got a personal interest. So you start off as a Navy helicopter pilot. I didn't know you did a transition to fixed wing, became fighter pilot in F-18s. Being a Marine Cobra pilot, had a few. There was a short window, probably when I was a Marine Corps captain. Some of my helo buddies, they did the transition to fixed wing. I know one of them didn't make it, and one of them became an F-18 pilot and lived happily ever after. So I didn't know that the Navy had done that at one point. Was that like a special case?
So the program has existed, for a long time. It's, sometimes they open the floodgates and others they don't. There's usually about 5 or 6 per year that are picked up for the program.
Uh,
And it's a way the Navy can like level the force structure. So the helicopter community has too many people and there's interested parties, they can move them towards F-18s. And so you factor in retention and community health.
mhm.
And I love flying helicopters. I was stationed in Hawaii with HSL 37, and you flew around the islands, and we went on deployments. But it was phenomenal flying. And then that's where I really learned to surf, I guess. And then switched over to F-18s and spent the better part of my career in Lemoore, Central California, flying Hornets, which I loved as well. In fact, I was one of those kids that loved the idea of fast, loud airplanes and saw Top Gun when I was 16, and that was something I always still wanted to do. So
Absolutely.
loved those as well, and in fact, I flew helicopters and fighters on the Roosevelt. I got to stay current in both, and so I
Cool
could take off
qualified.
in a
That's
helicopter
awesome.
one day and launch on a Super Hornet the next day, and
Yeah.
kept doing that up until the end.
I know my buddy Strap, he wanted to, because when I was stationed in Atlanta at Dobbins, we had Huey's Cobras and F-18s. He had been a Huey pilot, became an F-18 pilot. And so at one point, he was going to try to pull off flying all three in the same day, but I don't think he ever pulled it off.
Yeah, that would have been a nice hat trick.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding. So we always like to talk about transition out of the Navy. Granted, you had a 30-year career and you had retirement under your belt. What was your transition like getting out? Did you have a clear picture of what you wanted to do?
No, I didn't have a clear picture. I mean, but I actually kind of embraced the unknown, I guess. I know it can be daunting for many people based on your financial status and where you live. But I was pretty excited about it. I mean, and I say it to this day because, what's unique when you transition out, you have a lot more control of your destiny and you have opportunities that you might never have had before. So certainly would have been easy to go into the defense industry. There's plenty of jobs that would take advantage of somebody's experience in the military. And then you can work, the defense industry, which are good jobs. I was still current, so I started down the path of the airlines with a major airline, and which is what I intended to do initially, as I figured things out,
Mhm.
um, and was content with that because I just knew I could do that for as long as I wanted or stop. And in fact, in my case, I had a family tragedy that pulled me away from the airline path as I helped deal with some stuff back home for some family members, and then through that I pivoted towards a nonprofit in the area here in San Diego that they needed some leadership. That and you come out of the military with a lot of skills, but sometimes we think ourselves as the jack of all trades, master of none. But what we're really good at, I think, is operational management, operational risk management specifically, and that allows you to step into an organization, if you have any kind of leadership skills and understanding of risk management, and you can do some great things. And I think a lot of folks on the outside, welcome that or need that. So I joined a large nonprofit here in San Diego, and we focus on veteran issues, and was able to come in. And there's still a lot to learn because a lot of it's clinical treatment related, but it's managing people, it's managing programs, it's making sure you're compliant, managing risk, and you could kind of be a senior executive level from, in my case, to kind of help guide and shape the nonprofit and the things we do in the area. So
Yeah.
that's where I am now. And I don't, the thing is, unlike the military where you kind of know what you're going to do for 3 years and then you start thinking about the following tour. I mean, I don't know where I'll be a year from now because I think I still like the idea that I have flexibility and, maybe I'll pivot and do something different. But that's kind of the excitement for me, I think, is the
Yeah.
unknown.
Yeah. Yeah. I wanted to ask, like, are you comfortable talking about what happened when you were CO of the USS Theodore
Yeah.
Roosevelt?
Yeah. Sure.
Okay. So,
Yeah,
because you're
absolutely.
kind of famous. I mean, or some might say infamous, but
Yeah. Yeah.
being a military guy, I remember when that happened, and I remember reading about it. It was in the middle of COVID. I just remember I just trying to get a sense of what was going on, and it was just like, man, what a tough spot to be in. So, you mind sharing that story with us? I'd love to hear it.
Oh, yeah. Um, certainly interesting time, March of 2020, which I'd been in command of the Roosevelt for a couple months at that point. And
Mm.
I will tell you, being commanding officer of an aircraft carrier is got to be the best job in the world. Like I said, you could fly a helicopter one day, a fighter the next, and then drive the ship to the South China Sea while the Chinese Navy was chasing you. And not only do you have nuclear reactors powering your ship, but you have a floating airport at sea.
Mhm.
So love the job. Would have done it forever. But at the end of the day, as we were dealing with COVID and the outbreak of COVID on the ship, and if anyone spent time on a ship, it's just not an ideal place to have a virus that can spread pretty quickly.
Right.
Um,
That's
and
cool.
and yeah, and like the rest of the world, we were figuring stuff out. And I don't fault anyone. There's absolutely no bitterness, in my assessment. Even back then, we basically had a problem where we had the virus on board. We could not, we were needed to quarantine people. You have 200 sailors in a bunk room in some cases on a ship, and that's a hard place to try to quarantine. I mean, they're too close. You're absolutely, you're doing the opposite of what you really want to do. So we had got to a sticking point, and there was, you can call it the fog of war because we were trying to get their authorities all the way back in DC to get the assistance we needed. Um, trying to get some barriers removed there in the local area in Guam where we were pierside, and we kind of kept hitting roadblocks and things were going slow. So at the end of the day, I had a team, right? A team of doctors and epidemiologists and other leadership on the ship and JAGs, and we looked at it and just nothing was good. All the numbers were pointing the wrong direction, and we were seeing this exponential growth of COVID cases, and we if we weren't careful, we were going to have upwards of 1 to 2,000 positive cases, if not more. And then you apply some kind of fatality rate to that. And our worry was that, 10, 20, 30 sailors then statistically would be overcome by COVID, which is, an ungodly number. 0 is the right number. And as a CO, when you're ultimately accountable for everything that happens on your ship, that's a big number. So
Mhm.
I was kind of a situation where I call it maybe a conscious versus career moment. I knew that, sending an email and asking for help and being more deliberate in my ask, as they say, was going to rock the boat a little bit, to use the Navy term.
Yeah.
Um, and that might have implications on my
So,
career in the
I
Navy,
had a
but I was
question.
okay with that.
What was the actual predicament you're in? Like, Guam didn't want you to port there because they knew you had COVID on board and it was too far to go
Well,
to San Diego,
yeah,
or
we were already pier side. It really just came down to getting
uh,
sailors off the ship
mhm.
as quickly as we could, and what was being made available was insufficient, and it wasn't in the right quantity, and we needed to really get off the majority of the crew. So that's the only way we were going to stem the rapid spread of it.
Uh-huh.
So we were just trying to do that, and there was political issues. There was administration back in DC was trying to manage this and trying to figure out how to deal with that. And again, the world was going through the same thing. I mean, the entire world was trying to figure this out. No one had adequate masks. There was no such thing as a vaccine. We were just trying to figure out how quickly it spread and the impact. And granted, your average sailor is pretty healthy, so compared to the society at large, they're at much less risk. But
Mhm.
so at the end of the day, I sent the email. I tried to basically break the logjam to try to get some needed attention and accelerate things that maybe were already in motion because we just didn't want to delay through the normal chain of process. And in the end, it did. It got a lot of movement. we were able to break down a lot of barriers. And then, of course, the email leaked out publicly, and then it just added additional scrutiny from the public, which in some cases, some argue actually helped because it just got more attention, and that means the Navy had to react even quicker. But obviously, it became a political issue at that point, and that's it's hard for anyone to predict how that goes. And so, end of the day, I was relieved of command by the acting secretary of the Navy, who, again, I don't fault. I think he was in a tough predicament, and he just needed to do what he thought was best for the Navy, which, I was going to do what was best for my sailors. And I don't think anybody wanted anything but the best for my crew. I just knew that nobody wanted it as much as I did. So I didn't want to leave anything on the table. And end of the day, at the end of the day, I was relieved, and there was a lot of political discussion about it, and there was talk about going back, being put back in command. And then ultimately, a couple months later, they made a final decision not to reinstate me. But then but Naval Aviation, for the full story, Naval Aviation took good care of me, and they, like, I had a good job. I kept flying. I stayed current. I stayed in San Diego when I came back, and I thought Naval Aviation particularly took really good care of myself and my family.
Yeah.
And like I said, we're a Navy family, so that was greatly appreciated.
Yeah. So it's almost like the email heard round the world, but
Yeah. That's
hold
probably
that.
the right now.
Yeah. Hold that thought. We're going to take a big break. We'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, back talking with Navy veteran Brett Crozier, author of Surf When You Can and former CEO of the aircraft carrier USS Theodore Roosevelt. So Brett, you ultimately retired from the Navy after 30 years. And where'd the idea for your book come from? Surf When You Can.
Yeah. So, I people ask me, how long it take to write. I'll tell people it took 30 years, but because it really was, it was all the stuff I learned. And really, I wrote it for three reasons. I think, one, I wanted to honor all the men and women that serve in the Navy, and all the incredible stories and things I learned during the military, and that's, it's not just military's, discipline and rank and hierarchy are important, but it's much more than that, right? I think to be a good leader and be part of a good organization, it's the relationships, the people you meet. And so I first and foremost wrote the book to honor the men and women. And then I also wrote it because I wanted people to, I wanted to share these stories I learned, and the importance of things like culture and having a life-work balance, and why it's important as a leader to be kind, and how I think at the end that makes you successful and your organization even more successful. And then third, kind of like we alluded to earlier, I wanted people to know I was not bitter in any way, disappointed because it was the best job in the Navy, but the Navy has a mission to accomplish, and it's a very important mission. So there was never any bitterness, and nor is there today on anything that went down with the TR. I think in the end, people had to make the best decisions they could, myself included. And I'm okay with that. I wouldn't necessarily change what I would do. I would have done the same thing on behalf of my sailors. But I also think that there's other people that made decisions that they thought was in the best interest of the Navy. And I don't fault anybody because it was a challenging time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not a memoir. It's a book about life and leadership, and the importance of things like how to prioritize and focus on the closest alligator, as we say in the military. It's the importance of teamwork, and why I call the chapter pull like a Clydesdale, which means that for those that know anything about horses, two horses pulling together is much more effective than two separate horses with their individual efforts, because when you have a team and you can work together, you can do amazing things. And I talk about sharing espresso in the first chapter, because I've there's so many relationships and folks I've met in the throughout my career, and the bonds that you could establish outside of work, sharing espresso in the example of Luigi or others, really make you better at work. It makes you a better team. And so I think as a leader, especially today, no matter what you do, whether it's corporate or military or nonprofit like I am now, understanding the aspects of leadership, maybe the softer side of it in terms of building culture and camaraderie and loyalty, will make you effective as a leader. And I think that's kind of, in some cases, the secret sauce, as they were. And I think importantly, it's a good way to live life. And
yeah. Now, anytime throughout your Navy career, were you ever saying, "Oh man, someday I'm going to write a book," or was this coming around shortly after retirement? Like just popped in your head, or was it a long time coming?
I think I've always had stories. So like any good Navy pilot, I could tell a story or two at the I-bar, or I don't know that I thought about writing a book till I got towards the end of my career and realized that, I was leaving the service, and these incredible experiences were going to come to an end in some way. And I was a math major, to be fair. So, writing for me is a hard, deliberate process that takes time. So It wasn't like I knew I wouldn't just whip out a book, but I had, the whole book writing process for those that do it. I mean, the hard part is figuring out what you're going to leave out, because there's so much stuff you want to include in stories and
Yeah.
how you shape it. And I enjoyed that process. And because you're teamed up with people and you have an editing team and you get a lot of feedback, and you've got to be open to that. And, unless you've been writing books professionally for years, there's going to be people that are going to help you along the way and edit and give you feedback. And for me, it was important to get feedback from folks that were not in the military as well, because the book is, for more than just those in the military. It's kind of a broad approach to share military stories, but with a wider audience in a way that relates
Yeah.
and translates for them.
Can you talk about some of the business aspects of getting started? I mean, what were your first couple of steps? You contact a publisher, you find a buddy that has written a book and go with that.
Yeah. So it's
Self-publishing.
definitely about networking. It's definitely about
Yeah.
finding people that are in the industry, that can help guide you and mentor you. And you kind of have to, they say written out is thought out. So it's really important to, I think, put pen to paper and start writing, and obviously, kind of shape it out. You don't have to write a whole book. What you're really trying to do is write an outline initially and figure out what the book's going to be about, why it's going to resonate, and you got to think who your audience is. How I wrote this book was, very much determined by who I wanted to read it. And I wanted to be read by a wide audience. I wanted my niece, who's 10, to read it and understand it and some of the title chapters, and have a takeaway, as well as a 70-year-old, former Navy veteran that served, back in this, the 70s or something. That's, to me, I had a broad audience. So I wanted to make it relatable, and that helped me kind of guide the outline process. And then, write a chapter, find a chapter to write that's kind of help folks understand what you're talking about. And then you've got this package, and you can kind of shop it around. And this is where connections matter and feedback matters. And you have to have thick skin. You have to be willing to accept criticism and guidance. And I think when you do that, you can help with, it's the whole steel sharpens steel. If you're willing to take that criticism and then incorporate, and not necessarily change your message, but understand how you can shape your message and your story without changing it, then I think you'll find a wider audience and interest. And eventually you'll find someone who's interested, and then they want to start talking about it. And then you start talking things like timelines and what they, word counts and stuff like that. And then at some point you kind of get a green light, and they're like, all right, I like it. You can sign a contract, and, there's all kinds of things with financing and all that goes into it. But, unless you won the lottery, it's not that you can give up your day job to do it. So I kept working, and I'm still working to this day. This has been, it's been all encompassing. I'd argue it is a full-time job to not only write, but then promote. So you basically have to, like anyone's trying to start a business, you're all in on it all the time. And then your day job is, in my case, running a nonprofit. So it definitely keeps you busy. You can have the time. It's not just a weekend project. There's a lot of work, because the marketing then, which is the phase I'm in now, is doing podcasts, interviews, travel, book signings, which is fun. It's an exciting part of it. And that's really, how you market something is as much determines the success of the book as anything. And I enjoy that part. So that's kind of fun.
And where's the best place to find Surf With You Can? Surf When You Can?
So surf when you can. You can get it at any major retailer. You can order the audio book that I did, or you can get it on Amazon, Borders, Barnes and Noble. And if you can go to Simon & Schuster, who is the publisher that picked it up, or you can go to I have a website that helps direct traffic. It's called surfwhenyoucan.com, which talks about the book. There's some links to the media and press reviews. And then I actually throw in some nonprofits that are important to me. And I think, if anyone wants to know more about nonprofits, I put some ones on there, my own included, that I think are important, and they're doing good work and guide people that way.
Did you do the audio yourself on the audiobook?
I did. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, I'm just curious, like, how did that go? Like, you go into a studio and they just put you in front of a microphone, or what?
It is. Yeah. You go in a studio, it's quiet, and you've got a producer that kind of listens, and you might ask you to reread something, or, restate something, and so it's a long process. Obviously, there's professional narrators out there that can do it, maybe, with, not first pass. I mean, but for your average person like myself, who hasn't probably read out loud for many years, since I was in third grade, I think, it takes a little bit to get warmed up and get the tone right and the tempo and the pace right. And then, obviously, if your stomach gurgles, or they're going to have to, they do a lot of editing as well to make it kind of seem smooth and seamless, but it's a fun process. It takes a fair amount of time.
Yeah. And you got somebody right there listening in and managing the equipment or whatever the whole time. So I mean, it's a lot that goes into that. I mean, just recording a 30-second intro or something for the podcast. Sometimes I'll do like 5, 6, 7, 8
Right.
takes on it, just doing it over and over. So
Yeah. Professional narrators, they say if the book say is 6 hours, that might take them 8 hours of recording. For a total novice, it might take them 3 or 4 times that. And so it could take you 18, 20 hours. I think I don't know, for my 6-hour book, it probably took me 10, 12 hours of recording. And then they just because you'll have those pauses and they want to make it smooth and
yeah.
seamless.
How many
So
different times? How many pieces you break that up? Like how many times you go into the studio to get it all done?
I think we did 4 days, four or 5 days of it, just like, a couple hours. You can't, as you know, if you sit there and talk out loud for more than about 3 or 4 hours, your voice is going to crack and get dry. It's hard to maintain the energy you want.
Right.
But I've only listened to part of it. Someone will have to listen to it and tell me what they think. And I'm waiting for my wife. My wife's rereading the book, and I want her to hear the audio. So I'll wait to hear what she says about my voice.
Right. And with the publisher, how did they make the decision of letting you read it versus getting a professional narrator?
They gave me the option, and they obviously they could always back out it if they wanted, but they said, if you're willing to read it, which is always preferred, because then you get to hear the author's tone, and then that's, they generally would default to that unless you just can't read out.
So they do prefer the actual author to read it themselves.
I think generally, yeah, in most cases. It depends on the book, obviously. And some narrators though are incredible, and if you're talking about a fiction book where they're doing different characters and voices and sounds, that that's not generally what the author wants to do. But we're talking nonfiction, generally the author's reading is preferred because you get to hear the voice and the tone.
Yeah, because I love audiobooks because you can be doing other things while you're cranking through. Yeah. But I didn't realize that's interesting. I've never had that conversation about somebody who actually read their own book or narrated their own book. So so how things going so far with the book and
really good. Yeah. It's been great. I did a trip to New York City for some promo. I was on The View and Chris Cuomo's show and
a lot of
news articles. I did it's the book segment of that.
And what going on The View?
Yeah, it was good. I didn't do the panel. I did with Alyssa Farrow's Griffin, who does the book segments. It was good. They were super supportive. It's fun to talk about. I was able to, my wife was there, so she got to be on camera. They showed her. We talked about military spouses and very supportive. But overall, I would say it's been a great experience. I've enjoyed that and everything that it brings for it. So,
wow, that's awesome. Well, we are getting close to the end of our time. So, just, give us a quick summary of, overall, if somebody out there is listening, from a business entrepreneur perspective, you covered it all pretty good so far, but like anything else come to mind, any advice you might give to somebody that getting out of the military and wants to write their own book?
Yeah, I think just start. I think there's, it's easy to second guess yourself, particularly coming from the military, where your future is more unknown or uncertain, as we say. But just don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid on the book path, just to start. Sometimes that's the hardest thing. It's just kind of getting started. That's probably true in any business, right? A lot of people have business ideas and they're afraid to get started because they don't have it all laid out. I'd argue, you know what, you're going to probably learn quicker if you just take that first step and start moving. It's the whole kind of fail fast mentality. And in the book writing, it's very similar. You're going to get feedback. You're not expected to write a perfect copy right out of the gate. You're going to have to edit, and there's going to be a lot of iterations. So I think just getting started and trust your gut and trust your experience, and know you're coming with a lot of incredible skills you get from your time in the military that will serve you well, no matter what you choose to do.
Awesome. Well said. Well, good to see things are going well for you, and you've made that successful transition out of the big blue nav, and look forward to seeing your future success.
Yeah. Thanks, Joe. I appreciate the time today, and I hope people enjoy the book.
You bet. All right. These two, I can say these two naval aviators are Oscar Mike.
We're out. All right. Thanks, Joe. I'm gonna get out of here, but I appreciate